No one noticed him at first. That was the strange part. The bar was loud but not chaotic, the steady hum of music under conversations, glasses clinking, chairs scraping against the floor. A place where people came to be seen, to be heard, to take up space. He did neither. He sat alone at the far end of the bar, shoulders relaxed, posture upright. A dark jacket. No logos. No flash. No signs that said important. Just a man with a drink in front of him, staring at nothing in particular. At first, he blended in. Then he didn't. 3 men near the pool table had started watching him. Not openly. Not obviously. Just enough to notice that he wasn't playing the same social game as everyone else. One of them leaned over and smirked. Guy's been sitting there like he owns the place. Another chuckled. Or like he's waiting for something. They didn't know why his silence irritated them. It just did. A few minutes passed. The music shifted. Laughter rose and fell. The man at the bar didn't move. That's when one of them brushed past him shoulder to shoulder, too firm to be accidental. Too casual to be called out. No apology. The man didn't turn around. Didn't sigh. Didn't roll his eyes. Didn't even acknowledge it happened. That calm felt like an insult. "Hey!" The man said louder this time. "You hear me?" Still nothing. Nearby conversation slowed. The bartender glanced over. A couple at a table stopped mid-sentence. This was no longer nothing. The tallest of the 3 stood up, confidence fueled by attention and alcohol. He took a step closer. "What? You too good to answer," he said. That's when the man at the bar finally turned his head. Slow, controlled, unrushed. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't scared either. It was focused. The kind of look someone gives when they're taking in a situation, not reacting to it. For a brief moment, something shifted in the room. A tension people couldn't explain. Because without realizing it, everyone there had made the same mistake. They thought the quiet man was cornered. They had no idea who he really was. And the night was just getting started. The man at the bar wasn't looking for attention. That part mattered more than anyone in the room realized. He hadn't chosen the seat to make a statement. He hadn't come to be noticed, recognized, or challenged. In fact, the exact opposite was true. He picked the far end of the bar because it was quiet, because it was out of the way, because it allowed him to exist without being observed, for once. For most of his life, that luxury didn't exist. The man they were sizing up, dismissing, and quietly provoking was Steven Seagal, but not the version people expected. Not the action hero image frozen in old movie posters. Not the larger-than-life figure people argued about online. Just a man who had spent decades learning how people behave when they think no one important is watching. That was why he stayed quiet. Not out of fear. Not out of confusion. But out of understanding. Steven had learned long ago that silence makes people uncomfortable. When you don't play along, don't laugh, don't posture, don't compete, some people don't know what to do with that. They start projecting. Filling the quiet with assumptions. He thinks he's better than us. He's weak. He's an easy target. Those thoughts happen fast, almost automatically. And that's what Steven was watching unfold. He noticed the glances first, the way the men near the pool table looked him up and down, not with curiosity but with evaluation, measuring status, ranking, deciding where he fit, or didn't. He'd seen it in dojos, on movie sets, in meetings where the loudest voice was mistaken for the strongest one. People often confuse dominance with confidence. Steven didn't. Years of discipline had taught him something most people never learn: reacting is easy. Restraint is hard. Anyone can escalate a situation. Very few know how to let tension pass without feeding it. That's what he was trying to do. He kept his hands visible, his posture neutral, his breathing steady. Small details, but important ones. Details that signal, I'm not here to challenge you. But those signals only work on people who are paying attention. The men weren't. They were drinking, feeding off each other's energy, looking for something to break the monotony of the night. And Steven's quiet presence gave them exactly that, a blank canvas for their frustration. From their perspective, he looked like someone who wouldn't fight back, older, alone, calm to the point of indifference. What they didn't understand was that calm doesn't come from weakness, it comes from experience. Steven wasn't ignoring them because he didn't hear them. He heard everything. The comments, the laughter, the tone shift when the first bump didn't get a reaction. He also heard the room, the way conversations slowed when voices rose, the way people subtly leaned away, instinctively sensing something was changing. The bartender's hesitation, the familiar feeling of a moment tipping towards something unnecessary. That's when Steven made a decision, not to act, but to wait. Because moments like this reveal more if you let them play out. When someone thinks they have power, they show you who they are. Not all at once, but in layers. First with jokes, then with disrespect, then with pressure. Steven had no interest in humiliating anyone. He wasn't there to prove a point. But he was curious in the way someone gets when they've seen this pattern too many times to count. How far would they go? Would someone step in? Would the room self-correct? Would basic decency reappear once things became uncomfortable? Those questions mattered, because this wasn't just about a bar, or a misunderstanding, or a few drinks too many. It was about something deeper and far more common, how people treat someone they believe has no status, no leverage, no protection. Steven had spent a lifetime learning that the real test of character isn't how people act when they're admired. It's how they act when they think no one important is watching. And right now in that bar, everyone believed exactly that. Which is why he stayed seated, why he didn't interrupt, why he let the silence stretch. Because the truth was already revealing itself, slowly, uncomfortably, and the night hadn't even reached its turning point yet. The space around him began to shrink. Not physically at first, no one blocked his chair or touched him again, but socially. The kind of pressure that comes when people stop treating you like background noise and start treating you like a problem that needs to be solved. The three men were closer now. Not close enough to be obvious, close enough to be intentional. Steven stayed seated. He rested his forearms lightly on the bar, fingers relaxed, eyes forward. To anyone watching carefully, his body language was neutral, not defensive, not aggressive. But neutrality in moments like this often irritates people more than resistance. Because resistance gives them something to fight. Neutrality denies them that satisfaction. One of the men laughed too loudly. "So what, you mute or something?" A few people nearby chuckled, not because it was funny, but because laughter is sometimes a way to avoid tension. The bartender wiped the counter a little harder than necessary, glancing up and then away. Steven could feel it now, that invisible line where a situation can still dissolve or tip. He had been in moments like this before, not always in bars, sometimes in meetings, sometimes in unfamiliar cities. Different settings, same psychology. When people feel watched by their peers, they double down. The tallest man shifted his stance, squaring his shoulders. Not toward Steven exactly, but toward the room. This wasn't just about the man at the bar anymore. It was about image. Respect, in their minds, had to be taken. Steven turned slightly, enough to acknowledge them without escalating. "I'm just here for a drink," he said calmly. "No trouble." The words were simple, reasonable, almost boring. That made it worse. "Funny," one of them replied, "because trouble seems to keep finding you." Steven didn't answer right away. He noticed the small things instead. The tightening jaw, the restless hands, the way one of them kept glancing around, checking who was watching. People rarely act out alone. They act out when they feel supported. That's why Steven stayed composed. He knew something most people don't. When you raise your voice, you give control away. When you rush, you lose clarity. And when you react emotionally, you become predictable. Predictability is weakness. The bar felt quieter now, even though the music hadn't changed. Conversations faded into murmurs. Someone at a nearby table pulled their chair back slightly, instinctively creating distance. The men mistook this for momentum. "You ignoring us is real disrespectful," the tallest one said, stepping closer. "You think you're better than us or something." Steven met his eyes. Not challenging, not apologetic. Honest. "No," he said, "I don't." That answer landed strangely. It wasn't defensive enough to provoke. It wasn't submissive enough to satisfy. For a brief second, uncertainty flickered across the man's face. He hadn't expected calm. He hadn't expected sincerity. And uncertainty makes people uncomfortable. So he filled it with aggression. "You got a funny way of showing it," he snapped. Steven exhaled slowly. Inside, he was weighing outcomes. If he stood up suddenly, it would escalate. If he stayed silent, it would continue. If he walked away, it would follow him. This was the narrow space where judgment mattered. People often think strength shows up in dramatic moments, raised voices, bold gestures, decisive moves. But the truth is, strength often appears much earlier, in the restraint before any of that happens. Steven chose his words carefully. "I don't want this to turn into something it doesn't need to be," he said. There it was. Not a threat, not a plea, a boundary. The men exchanged looks. The room waited. And in that waiting, something subtle but important happened. A few people stopped rooting for the confrontation. You could feel it. The energy shifted from curiosity to discomfort. Someone near the door shook their head slightly. The bartender stepped closer, ready to intervene. The social tide was changing, but not everyone noticed. One of the men scoffed. "Then maybe you should leave." Steven nodded once. "I was about to," he said. That was when one of them muttered under his breath, just loud enough to be heard. "Figures." Steven paused, not because the comment hurt, but because it revealed something. They didn't want him to leave peacefully. They wanted him diminished. And that difference mattered. Because moments like this aren't really about conflict. They're about power. And power is never tested when everyone agrees. It's tested when someone refuses to play the role you assigned them. Steven stood slowly, not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to signal that the moment had reached its edge, and the room leaned in. Because whatever happened next would say far more about everyone involved than the night ever intended to. Have you ever been in a situation where staying calm made others more aggressive? Why do you think silence sometimes angers people more than words? At this point, what would you have done? Stayed, walked away, or spoken up? Steven had just shifted his weight when the moment cracked. Not with a shove, with a voice. Wet. It came from behind the bar, slightly off to the side. Not loud, not dramatic, but sharp enough to cut through the tension that had settled over the room. Everyone turned. A woman near the end of the counter was staring at Steven. Not casually, not curiously. She was frozen, eyes wide, color draining from her face as if something had just clicked in her mind and refused to let go. She took a step closer, then another. That's, she said, hesitating, almost afraid to finish the sentence. That's Steven Seagal. The name didn't land all at once. It rippled. A delayed reaction. A couple of people laughed, short, nervous laughs, the kind people use when they think something sounds ridiculous but aren't entirely sure. Yeah, right? One of the men said. Sure it is. But the laughter didn't spread. Funds came out now, not subtly, not pretending anymore. Screens lit up faces. Someone whispered, no way. Someone else leaned in closer, squinting, comparing the man in front of them to memories from a different time. The bartender stopped moving entirely. The tallest man frowned. So what? He said louder than necessary. That's supposed to mean something. Steven closed his eyes briefly. Not out of fear. Out of frustration. This was exactly what he hadn't wanted. He turned toward the woman and gave a small nod. Not confirming, not denying, just acknowledging that the moment had arrived. The energy in the room shifted instantly. It always does. Recognition is a powerful thing. It rewrites reality in seconds. The same posture that looked unimpressive a moment ago now seemed deliberate. The same silence that felt insulting suddenly felt intimidating. Status changes perception. Steven reached into his jacket slowly. Every movement measured, calm, intentional. He placed something flat on the bar and slid it forward. His ID. The bartender picked it up, glanced once, then again. His expression changed so fast it was almost uncomfortable to watch. Sir, he said, voice suddenly respectful, almost nervous. I didn't realize. Steven met his eyes. That's the point, he replied quietly. The men stepped back now. Not all at once. Just half a step, enough to break the circle, enough to create space. But space didn't erase what had already happened. One of them crossed his arms defensively. So what, we're just supposed to bow now? Steven shook his head. I didn't ask for special treatment, he said. I didn't ask for anything. The room was silent. Because everyone understood the implication. If his name hadn't been recognized, if the ID hadn't come out, if the woman hadn't spoken up, nothing about their behavior would have changed. The bartender cleared his throat. Sir, drinks are on the house. We're really sorry about. Steven raised a hand gently. No, he said. That won't fix it. The men avoided eye contact now. One stared at the floor. Another pretended to check his phone. The tallest one clenched his jaw, irritation and embarrassment fighting for control. You could have said who you were, he muttered. Steven looked at him. And this time, his voice carried something heavier than calm. Why should I have to? He asked. No accusation, no anger. Just a question. A question that hung in the air far longer than anyone was comfortable with. Because the truth was obvious. Respect shouldn't depend on recognition. Steven picked up his jacket, draping it over his arm. He wasn't angry. He wasn't triumphant. If anything, he looked tired. I came in as a stranger, he said, glancing around the room, and I was treated like one. He paused. Everything after that, he continued, was your choice. No threats followed, no lectures. Just consequences not imposed but revealed. And somehow that was worse. The room didn't snap back to normal after that. It couldn't. Moments like this don't resolve cleanly, because what was revealed wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was behavior. And behavior, once seen clearly, can't be unseen. The manager came out from the back almost immediately. Apologies spilled out quickly, overlapping each other. There's been a mistake. We didn't know. This isn't what we stand for. Steven listened without interrupting. That alone made the words feel smaller. Because apologies often come fast when consequences appear, but they come late when respect should have come first. Steven didn't raise his voice. He didn't demand anything. He didn't even look angry. But there was something unmistakably serious in the way he stood there, jacket folded over his arm, eyes moving slowly across the room. I don't blame anyone for not knowing my name, he said calmly. That line caught people off guard. Some expected anger, others expected pride. They got neither. But what happened tonight, he continued, had nothing to do with who I am. He gestured subtly toward the men. You didn't treat me that way because I'm Steven Seagal, he said. You treated me that way because you thought I was nobody. That's when the shift really happened. Because that statement forced everyone, not just the men involved, to reflect. Human behavior follows patterns. When someone believes they hold social power, they test it. Not always consciously, often in small ways. A joke that goes too far. A shove that's framed as an accident. A comment said just loud enough to humiliate. Those actions aren't random. They're experiments. What can I get away with? Who will stop me? Who won't? The men hadn't planned to escalate things. They hadn't walked in looking for a confrontation. But once they decided Steven didn't matter, everything after that became easier. Disrespect always starts with dehumanization, subtle at first, then obvious. Steven understood that. That's why he didn't focus on punishment. He focused on exposure. If someone has to be important for you to show basic respect, he said quietly, then the respect was never real. The tallest man shifted uncomfortably. This got blown out of proportion. He muttered, "We were just messing around." Steven nodded slightly. "That's usually how it starts," he replied. Humans are very good at minimizing their behavior after the fact. Calling it a joke. Calling it nothing. Calling it harmless. But harm isn't defined by intention alone. It's defined by impact. The impact here was clear. The bartender avoided eye contact now, guilt flickering across his face. A few patrons looked embarrassed, realizing they had watched without intervening. Others crossed their arms defensively, uncomfortable with the mirror being held up to the room. Because this wasn't about three men anymore. It was about everyone who stayed silent. Steven continued, not accusing, not preaching, explaining. When people think no one important is watching, he said, they stop performing kindness. That line landed hard. Kindness, for some, is conditional. It appears when there's something to gain. When reputation is on the line. When recognition is possible. But real character doesn't work that way. Real character shows up when there's no reward. Steven placed his ID back into his pocket. I didn't come here to make a scene, he said. I came here to sit quietly and leave quietly. He looked at the men again. You didn't give me that option. No one argued. Because arguing would require denying reality, and reality had already spoken. The manager offered again to comp drinks, to call security, to make things right. Steven shook his head. Making it right doesn't mean erasing it, he said. It means learning from it. He turned toward the door. That's when one of the men finally spoke, his voice lower now, stripped of confidence. So what happens now? Steven paused. Not for effect. For honesty. Nothing, he said. And that answer was heavier than any threat. Because nothing meant no external punishment, no spectacle, no public shaming. Just the internal consequence of knowing who you were when you thought it didn't matter. Steven opened the door and stepped into the night. Behind him, the bar remained quiet. Not because they were afraid, but because everyone there had just been reminded of something deeply uncomfortable. The real test of humanity isn't how we treat people we admire. It's how we treat the ones we think we'll never need. The door closed behind him with a soft, almost unnoticeable sound. No dramatic exit, no final glance back. Just the quiet click of wood and glass returning to its frame. Outside, the night air felt cooler than it had moments earlier. The street was calm, a sharp contrast to the tension he'd just walked away from. Cars passed in the distance. A siren echoed faintly somewhere far off. Life continued, indifferent to what had just happened inside that bar. He stood still for a moment. Not because he was shaken, but because moments like this always carried weight, even when they ended without violence, without shouting, without spectacle. Inside the bar, nothing immediately went back to normal. People shifted in their seats. Conversations tried to restart and failed. Laughter sounded forced when it appeared at all. The music kept playing, but it felt out of place now, like noise filling a space that had lost its rhythm. The three men returned to the pool table, but the energy was gone. One racked the balls without enthusiasm. Another leaned on his cue, staring at the felt without really seeing it. The tallest one stood apart, arms crossed, jaw tight, replaying the moment in his head whether he wanted to or not. Because the embarrassment wasn't public. It was personal. That was the part no one could escape. They hadn't been yelled at. They hadn't been threatened. They hadn't even been officially reprimanded. They had simply been seen, clearly, accurately, at a moment when they believed no one important was watching. That kind of realization lingers. The bartender wiped down the counter again, slower this time. He kept glancing toward the door Steven had walked through, then away, as if unsure what he was feeling. Regret, maybe. or something closer to recognition. He'd watched the situation unfold. He'd hesitated. He'd waited for it to resolve itself. Most people do, because stepping in feels risky, because silence feels safer, because it's easier to assume someone else will handle it. But now there was no one else to blame. At a nearby table, a couple spoke quietly. "That could have gone really bad," one of them said. "Yeah," the other replied. "We were all just watching." That sentence carried more truth than they realized. Watching is participation, just without accountability. Outside, Steven walked down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, pace unhurried. His thoughts weren't angry. They weren't triumphant either. They were reflective. He'd seen versions of this scenario play out countless times, with different faces, different places, different outcomes. Sometimes things escalated. Sometimes they didn't. Tonight, restraint had held barely. But restraint always has a cost. Not physical, mental. Because choosing not to react doesn't mean nothing happens. It means everything happens internally instead. He knew the men inside would remember this night. Not because of who he was, but because of who they were when they didn't know. And that distinction mattered. The hardest lessons are the ones with no external punishment. No fine, no expulsion, no public reckoning. Just a quiet understanding that you failed a test you didn't know you were taking. Steven stopped at the corner and waited for the light to change. A group of people crossed the street laughing, unaware of him, unconcerned with his presence. Just strangers passing strangers. That anonymity felt grounding. Because this was the world as it really was, not the curated version where names and reputations decide how people behave. Inside the bar, the manager finally spoke to the men. "Let's just cool it tonight," he said. Everyone. They nodded, not because they were being generous, but because the night had already taken something out of them. The realization that power isn't proven by dominance, that respect isn't automatic, and that sometimes the most uncomfortable consequences come not from being punished, but from being understood. Steven crossed the street as the light changed. He didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The moment had already done its work. By the next morning, the bar would be just a bar again. Tables wiped clean, glasses stacked, music playing like nothing unusual had ever happened. For most of the people there, the night would fade into the background, another story competing with dozens of others for space in their memory. But moments like this don't disappear that easily. They settle. They resurface at unexpected times, in quieter situations, in small decisions, in the split second before someone chooses how to treat another person. That's where their real impact lives. What happened wasn't about fame. It wasn't about intimidation. And it certainly wasn't about winning. Steven Seagal didn't walk away having proven he was powerful. He walked away having proven he didn't need to. And that distinction is everything. Power that needs to announce itself is fragile. It depends on reaction, recognition, validation. Take those away, and it collapses. The men in the bar believed they had power because they were louder, younger, more numerous. But real power never shows up that way. It shows up as control over ego, over impulse, over the urge to dominate when someone feels small. That night, Steven controlled the only thing that truly belonged to him, his response. He didn't escalate when it would have been easy. He didn't humiliate when he had the chance. He didn't demand apologies when they were offered. Instead, he let the truth stand on its own. And truth, when left exposed, has a way of doing the work for you. This story matters because it happens everywhere. In offices, where quiet employees are talked over. In public places, where service workers are dismissed. In everyday interactions, where respect is given only when status is obvious. Most people don't intend to be unkind, but intention doesn't erase behavior. And behavior is often shaped by what we think we can get away with. That's the uncomfortable part. Because it means moments like this aren't rare exceptions. They're reflections. The real question isn't what those men did. It's what we do when we're in similar situations. When someone doesn't look impressive. When they don't speak loudly. When they don't demand attention. Do we still offer patience? Do we still offer respect? Do we still treat them like they matter? Steven didn't ask for special treatment that night. He asked for normal treatment. And the fact that normal treatment only appeared after recognition is the lesson that lingers. Character isn't tested when the outcome is obvious. It's tested when no one is keeping score. That's why this moment resonates. Not because it involved someone famous, but because it revealed something human. How quickly arrogance fills silence, how easily power is mistaken for worth, and how restraint, though quiet, often speaks the loudest. In the end, no one was punished. No one was celebrated. But everyone who witnessed it was changed, even if they didn't realize it yet. And that's sometimes the most meaningful outcome of all. Which moment in this story stood out to you the most? Do you think the situation would have ended the same way if no one had recognized him? Have you ever seen someone treated differently once their status became known? More powerful stories like this are coming. If you want to help shape future videos, share which parts you